Okay, guys. Sorry about that. We're gonna have to split this up. I ran and bumped into the situation where I had a 10-minute limit, so this should not happen again. Hopefully, this will keep rolling throughout the rest of the conversation here. But where I kind of left off, and if you kind of look at this chart, the New Jersey plan versus the Virginia plan, and then of course the Great Compromise just down there. The New Jersey plan, right, ran through one House legislature, unicameral, versus the two-house legislature, which is bicameral. Okay, so you got to understand the terminology there. Equal representation in Congress versus representation in Congress based on population. What does that sound like? Well, if you look at our modern day situation, we have two houses. Okay, one of them, right, is based on everybody has equal representation in Congress, more closely known as the Senate, and then obviously in the House of Representatives, you have it all based off of your state's population. That was a huge compromise because you had a situation to where, well, if we have more people who need represented here inside the United States, these new states that we're establishing, what's to prevent the tyranny or the will of others from running rampant over the others? Okay, so I mean, it's a valid argument, but at the same time, it's also something that you have to work through if you're going to get through and develop some sort of an agreement inside of this whole mess that we've got rolling on here. Focusing back, if we step down a little bit further, okay, supported by the larger states was the Virginia plan. Supported by the smaller states, that was the New Jersey plan. And I mean, it really does kind of make sense, right? If you live in a smaller state, you don't want to be told what to do by representation from the larger states, because if you go into a situation like the House of Representatives, California has a great deal more representatives for their state than someplace like Massachusetts or Indiana or something like that. So you have to think about those things. I mean, it does make sense that they would be very cautious and very slow to jump on board with that New Jersey or Virginia plan. All right. So, I mean, obviously, it would be natural human nature if you were a part of a larger state that said, hey, we have more people here. Why shouldn't we get more representation? And I can see both sides to this. So that's why it really is kind of an awesome thing that we came to this great compromise and brought together a two legislature equal representation for one side. Okay. And then also on the other side, you have it based off of equal representation. So it really is kind of an amazing thing that we kind of put things together with that. Well, kind of scroll over here. Scroll down here. Okay, now the next big compromise, the next huge thing that we're going to see start to pop up is the question of slaves. Okay, now if we kind of put into context where we're located, and when you kind of know the middle, southern, and northern colonies, the New England colonies rather, the southern portion of the United States has slaves. Okay, it is pretty bad, right? We talked about the differences in the views on slaves in these three different regions inside the United States. The South is one that is really kind of pushing for there to be some sort of representation counted with their slaves. All right, so kind of running through on the Southern states square here. The Southern states wanted slaves to be counted as a population, and that was mostly for taxation reasons, for tax credit reasons, and things of that nature, so they could have a little bit more of a boost. The fact that they are having to take care of these slaves and that poor them. Sorry, my bias is kind of coming in and trickling in there. Then, of course, on the other side, the northern states, okay, they opposed counting slaves as population, and that's mostly because they said, well, they're products, right? You don't just go in and say, hey, I'm a tomato salesman. You should count my tomatoes as products. So both are inherently racist. Okay? I mean, but both of them they both have huge flaws. They both have a big problem as far as their views of mankind and stuff like that. But overall, we end up coming to this three-fifths compromise. And it's very kind of sickening in a way that we would kind of iron out and say, hey, you are a black man and you are three-fifths of a person. Okay, you are three-fifths of representation, right? You don't get recognition from that. And that was the ultimate compromise for the states with a lot of slaves in the South, and then also for the North. to kind of make sure that the South wasn't exceeding their state's populations to an excessive amount. So that Three-Fifths Compromise was huge and instrumental in getting those southern states to jump on board and agreeing to the Constitution. And by the way, this is still in the Constitution. Okay, we've not gone back and said, hey, let's get rid of that language of Three-Fifths Compromise. No, you can actually still find Three-Fifths Compromise talking about how African Americans, well, slaves at this point, are viewed as three-fifths. So it's kind of interesting if we go back and look at that. But that's another story. So moving on here. You have the situation of the presidency. The whole concept of, oh, this guy's going to be in charge of the United States. That sounds like a king to me, all right? So obviously there's going to be a lot of cautious people walking into the arena to try and understand and get together what the limits are and what the role of the presidency will be. And we couldn't have had a better person to be in charge of it at this first go around. For the most part, I should say. He did have some flaws, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. The states' rights supporters, okay, wanted state legislatures to elect the president. And then, obviously, on the federal power side, wanted the direct election of the president by qualified voters. Qualified, number one on that list was that you were white and male. So, I mean, and then money and things like that would also be debated. But, excuse me. We'll kind of get to that here in a little bit as we progress in history. To the states' side, okay, favored a shorter presidential term, and the federal side wanted a longer presidential term of service. States' rights favored limits on the number of terms served. The Federalists wanted no limit to the terms. So we'd have a situation where we would have a compromise on the role of the presidency and things of that nature. What they end up coming up with is what we have kind of today for the most part, with the exception of a few things. We have indirect election of the president by the Electoral College. And this has turned out to be, for the most part, okay. As far as representation goes, the most recent situation, we've had several others, is 2000, okay, where they win the popular vote, but then lose the overall election because of the Electoral College representation of each state and things like that. Obviously, the 2000 election, George W. Bush did not win the popular vote. He lost the popular vote. Not enough people voted for him. Al Gore won the overall population vote. But in Florida, the state went to Bush. So it's kind of one of those big what-ifs in history, once again, that we've could really spend a lot of time talking about. But for the purpose of this class, that is not going to do much good because it is history. Okay, so we'll get to that later on and probably have a little bit of discussion about that election and the elections before that. But then the last one down here, you guys should all know 4 years of service, all right, per term. And what was actually ironed out, okay, and it wouldn't be changed until 1951 after FDR was elected 4 terms, okay, and died in office. Very, very popular president. The initial agreement was that there would be no limits of how many terms a president could seek. So, I mean, a lot of people were very, very scared and cautious about that, but it did work out until 1951. So it wasn't a huge issue for this point because there were still some ways to get people out of office. Okay, this next chart here, there we go. Kind of a breakdown for those debating about the Constitution. I'm not going to read through each one of these with you guys. You can pause, you can read through these, but these are just the overall noteworthy people involved in each side of the spectrum, the political argument, the political bickering. Like I said, one of the biggest names that you guys should know, and we will read one of the Federalist Papers, is Alexander Hamilton. Okay, huge influence as far as like political policy. He establishes the modern day Fed from this time period. First Secretary of the Treasury. Lots of things, a heavy influence, and he actually is going to influence a political election going on into the future. Actually, the next election after Adams comes into office, you have a huge split between Jefferson and Adams, and Hamilton will actually turn his back and vote for Jefferson. So it's kind of interesting. But the biggest thing to know, okay, Federalists, strong central government to preserve the Union, must be strong in order to keep laws and things of that nature, taxing, things of that nature. And then on the flip side, Anti-Federalist, states' rights. Strong central government, only to be served or only to serve to restrict those freedoms if they're really strong. So states come first. That's the view of Anti-Federalists. Okay, the ratification process. Okay, you can read through those charts, but ultimately, 9 of 13 chose to ratify, and there's the breakdown of those states that came together to understand and bicker and feud over this situation. What ended up getting, okay, most people on board and getting this thing ratified and knocked out was the addition of the Bill of Rights, because you had this huge situation. Okay, if we're jumping into this huge, more legalistic constitution, how are we going to know that we're going to have our rights? How are we supposed to know that this king is not going to rise up and basically create Britain number 2 or Britain Junior? So they come up with this Bill of Rights saying, okay, we guarantee you these things that will not be taken away from you if you are white and male. Eventually, ladies, you will be involved and incorporated into this. But for this section of history, if you're white and male, then that is where you are most, I guess, kind of appreciated or thought of, unfortunately. But we will eventually evolve. I digress. All right, going on. Finally, okay, George Washington. A lot of you guys picked him as your top president for this presidency project that we had for the POTUS tournament, which I'm still grading, still checking through. Had to take a break to make this video for us. To kind of give an overall interpretation of history, my interpretation and a lot of historians' interpretation that George Washington was a great president, very smart, very genius man. He had a lot of flaws. He really did kind of start the whole idea that, oh, there's a foreign problem, there's a foreign issue. Well, I'm just going to kind of kick the can down the road and let the next guy handle it. It started with him. A lot of people think of George Washington as kind of a god, so to speak, but he was not without his flaws. He was really the kind of president that kicked issues down the road and let other people handle it. And that's why John Adams' presidency was so flawed, and that's why he struggled so much, because a lot of those issues that he had, George Washington kind of let them snowball. So, but enough talking about his whole legacy. Let's kind of break down some of his big time events and big time things that were happening. Okay, first off, check out that cabinet. Okay, this was kind of one of the firsts. All right, the president kind of brings together a team, and George Washington brought together a team of rivals. Okay, he did not necessarily agree with everyone. In fact, he was on the opposite side of the fence with Jefferson. He was not completely at ease with having him on board. In fact, it's logged that those two bumped heads quite a bit. But that is what makes you good. I mean, if you think about whenever you put together a team, probably not necessarily like a sports team or something, but you want the best to be around you. Even if they do not agree with your policies or with your political perspectives, that is not really an excuse to kind of shun them and put them to the side, or at least this is my mindset. If our government were to bring up this mindset, I think that we'd be awesome, much better off than we actually are today. Bring together people who have good ideas, that are willing to listen to your side of the story, that you're willing to listen to their side of the story, where you can get common ground going. And I think that is one of the great things that George Washington really kind of recognized, is that he brought together his rivals. He was able to get things done with that type of an atmosphere, and really kind of set the precedent for future generations in political leadership inside the United States. So for that, he is awesome, George Washington. Shifting down here, federal court system. We have the establishment of the Supreme Court, but the Judiciary Act of 1789. Okay, here's the situation. Okay, after, and this really was kind of designed to keep political influence in the court system. It will eventually be overturned in 1801, I believe. Basically, what that does is, after a Supreme Court justice, which they get life terms, after they pass away or after they leave office or leave that position, you don't replace them. Okay, and what that does is it forces other districts and other circuit courts to kind of compensate for that lack of power. And basically, to prevent that, is it's trying to create a cyclical way of getting your political party's person placed into the Supreme Court with the approval of those circuit and district courts. So it really is kind of a way to preserve power, a very political move by Mr. George Washington, who's looked on as being a very honest and overly trustworthy type of individual, but he was a politician, just like Abe Lincoln. Okay, I mean, these guys were politicians. They knew how to play the game, and they had to do it to get things accomplished. So just kind of keeping that in mind moving forward. Okay, one of the big things for George Washington, and we talked about how Hamilton served as Secretary of the Treasury. He comes up with a huge financial program to kind of move the United States forward. And it's kind of outlined here to kind of offset costs, shrink national debt, pay things off, meet your agreements and things like that. But then it's also going to do several things for setting up a huge problem down the road. All right, to establish, understand who is going to cover what, where the limits of the federal government are, where the limits of the state governments are, and really what type of power the Constitution has moving forward. So run through here real quick. Pay off the debt is a huge calling for George Washington and his group of leaders. And how he's going to do that is through compromise and through some kind of original, for this point, ideas. Okay, and one of the big things to look at is the excise tax on whiskey. Okay, so you are getting into that whole sin tax area, basically making anyone who is making whiskey, selling whiskey, things like that, you need to pay a little bit extra tax. Okay, now you'll get into the situation to where some people think it's too high of a tax, some people think it's too low of a tax. But regardless, all right, that excise tax is setting a huge precedent moving forward. Here in Indiana, okay, you pay higher taxes on alcohol, on beer and stuff like that. Whenever you go to the liquor store, not that you do that, but when you are of age, you pay more taxes for that stuff. For cigarettes and things like that, you pay extra taxes, right? That's all coming back to that ideology that really kind of originated underneath Hamilton. I shouldn't say originated. They were doing that in other areas for tobacco and things of that nature, but he brought it to the colonies and he brought it to the United States, which is kind of noteworthy. Continuing on, protect domestic industry and capital. Hamilton's vision was very much mercantile. Okay, he wanted the United States to be involved in world trade, world organizations. So what he wanted to do is set high tariffs, and I'm talking high for anyone who's wanting to bring in non-American made goods. But on the flip side of that, you have the situation of not getting good prices set. If you are setting huge taxes, and if you guys know anything about economics, it can be offset and make things pretty costly for the consumer. So just kind of understanding that as a general, and we will talk more about that and look at that this week in class. A little bit of controversy. Jefferson versus Hamilton. You have this whole concept of, well, what does the Constitution say versus, well, what doesn't it say? Okay, so it's that strict construction versus loose construction. The elastic clause, the necessary and proper clause that will start to arise and be introduced into the Constitution. But the controversy between Jefferson and Hamilton, if you remember the breakdown of the political parties, Hamilton is a Federalist, okay, whereas Jefferson is more on the Republican, anti-Federalist side. So they're naturally going to bump heads. So it's not just Washington bumping heads with his group. It's his group bumping heads with his group. It's not all rainbows and sunshine and lollipops for George Washington in his cabinet meetings. They are bickering. They are fighting. And many times for the late night meetings, it's well documented that alcohol was involved. So if alcohol was involved, you can pretty much guarantee that they were fighting and bickering and cursing. The ladies of the White House who would actually hear some of, not the White House, sorry, the ladies of where Washington would conduct his meetings would note that they were not necessarily the most pleased with how they would conduct themselves. Some of them would even actually say women would not behave in such a manner. So those of you that are liking Hillary Clinton or liking the whole idea of a woman president, they were making smart little comments under their breath, even back in the times of Washington. So there's a little plug for people who are wanting to see a woman in the White House. There you go. Okay, kind of shifting focus, foreign affairs. After the French kind of influence us and get on board with the whole concept of helping us out and getting us through the war, and then we win the war, and then they leave and they go have their own little revolution, influenced by what they've seen in the United States. So complications start to arise because of the whole concept that, well, hey, we helped you. Why don't you kind of help us in our revolutionary mindset? But for those that know world history, they were helping a situation that was not necessarily completely similar in the fact that there were so many divisions in France at that point. So, I mean, it wasn't completely a shock that we stayed out of it, but at the same time, you can see why we might have benefited from going and helping them and getting them to a point where they could have more freedoms and things of that nature. So do we drop the ball with the French Revolution and going over there and assisting? That can be debated, and historians do debate it frequently. But the fact that we don't help them out does lead to a quasi-war later on down the road between the French and the Americans. And then we'll start to wave the whole, well, we're not going to call them French fries anymore. They are freedom fries. And that's actually something that did happen in 2004. Whenever we tried to get the French to join us in the Iraq War, and they said no, in the congressional cafeteria, they stopped selling French fries. We called them freedom fries. So there's a little random fact for us for this point. Okay, moving on down, British impressment. Basically what that means is that the British, even though we won the war, kicked their butts, they were still obviously involved in the West, but at the same time, you had the situation to where they were not respecting our fishing expeditions, our trade expeditions, and things like that. So the British were basically being bullies out in the middle of the ocean, stopping our ships, getting on board, searching, ransacking, taking supplies without paying. That leads to some issues. Okay, so kind of understanding what the premise was behind all that does kind of lead you to question the power of the federal government and question what the appropriate reaction would be for looking at something like that. Kind of skipping down here, the Genet Affair, what you have with that is basically the mindset of, you see foreign diplomats, in the case of Genet from France, influencing public opinion. Okay, well, you have diplomats coming over and giving their political opinions, trying to rally support from a country. Okay, what should the appropriate reaction be for the government? Okay, you have all this stuff happening, and it really is kind of a first situation for the government, and kind of see, okay, how do we test out the Constitution? How do we test out the strengths of our government, our presidency? For Jay's Treaty, this is basically our reaction to British impressment. It was a complete flop. Basically, you send over some diplomats and send over some negotiations committees to talk with the British and meet with these different impressing individuals who are ransacking our ships, and try to get them on board with stopping all of this stuff. Ultimately, John Jay, who is the lead diplomat with this situation, comes back with a treaty signed by the British. It does not even touch impressment. It does not stop the impressing. It doesn't really do any of that. What it does accomplish is it gets some of the British forts to relinquish their rights and actually get some of them to shut down and leave the area. So we gain more land, gain more opportunity. But as far as solving the issue, no dice, no cigar. Pinckney's Treaty, that is actually getting us more freedom from paying taxes from the Spanish down in Florida. So we're actually able to ship supplies, exchange, trade, things of that nature down in Florida, and actually send things down to New Orleans at this point in history. So we start to see the branching out and advancement of foreign affairs, okay, and getting out of this heavy taxation period from other countries, and start to have more say in what's going on within our borders. Okay, now flip side of this, domestic concerns. Right, for the American Indians, the Fallen Timbers and the Treaty of Greenville. Basically, this whole situation and where it all comes from is really all about access to land. Okay, having access to land, having access to various resources. Okay, so what we have here with the whole situation, it all boils down to the Northwest Territory. The American Indians believe that they should have access, that they should be able to stay in the area, even though our Constitution and our Confederacy before that said that nope, that is our land, and we are going to come in and take over production, take over all these different types of things. We run into a conflict. Ultimately, we have a battle. The United States, I guess, quote unquote, army at this point, where we're still kind of developing our own military, goes in and just crushes them. Okay, thousands are dead, men, women, and children. Okay, it is very gruesome. Now, hindsight. Okay, 1794, the Treaty of Greenville. To kind of get this whole situation kind of put aside, to not have this huge ongoing war and conflict, we decide that we are going to pay for rights to the southeastern quarter of the Northwest Territory. So it's more commonly known as the Ohio-Indiana region. So kind of bringing in some Indiana history to the topic. We're going to pay them about $10,000 modern day currency. Now, for this era, for this point in time, that's good money. All right, that is very good money. But in that process, they've got to cease and kind of desist any type of fighting or anything like that, to let us kind of do our thing, and never really our two paths shall meet sort of a mindset develops between the American Indians and the United States government. So it's a huge domestic issue, and it's a huge issue that Washington is going to have to tackle with the assistance of his VP. Okay, going forward, the Whiskey Rebellion. All right, grab some of my notes here for this one to kind of iron out. I wrote a little bit of a summary here. From Western Pennsylvania, it was a challenge to the federal government. A group of farmers really just kind of refused to pay the excise taxes on whiskey. So naturally, you can't just all right, hey, we're just going to ignore this law. Just kind of ignore it. You guys can do what you want, but we're going to ignore you. It doesn't really fly in the realm of government. So Washington obviously is going to send some militiamen. Okay, send his quote unquote military in there, and I say some. He's going to send 15,000 state militiamen, okay, into the region underneath the command of Alexander Hamilton. Comes up again, right? Strong government, rule with an iron fist sort of mindset, and Alexander Hamilton loves the ideology behind that. He sends them on the scene to show some force and show them that what the power of the federal government can do. And ultimately, the Whiskey Rebellion doesn't even rebel. It's just kind of like the whiskey protest is what it probably should be called. Ultimately, no bloodshed occurs, and with these 15,000 people, it's just kind of okay. Let's stop. All right, we'll pay some taxes. It's not worth us dying over. Okay. Then obviously adding more land, adding more territories, so dates and states down there listed. I won't have to spend too much time on that. Just know that it's a process. It's a process. The country is growing, the country is developing. With more states being added, you're going to see more of a situation of, I guess, kind of a spreading wider tax base that we can take benefit of and do more things, shrink the debt, do those types of things. So going on. All right, the emergence of political parties. Here is a huge one. We are split between these two. More evolution, more discussions. Okay, and they're all going to be split between Hamilton versus Jefferson. Okay, like I said earlier, Hamilton did not see eye to eye with Thomas Jefferson, and this is really going to set up the perfect storm here. Both of them had kind of had their views, and I think you can kind of guess who wanted to do what. As far as like the French Revolution, Whiskey Rebellion, and things of that nature. And you can kind of see with this chart the whole breakdown and how everything kind of works. Obviously, Adams and Hamilton, loose interpretation of the Constitution. They want a strong national government. And we will actually debate this view of the Constitution. If you guys think it should be something that's strict, what's the Constitution say? If it says that, we do it. If it doesn't say it, we don't do it. You do not create any gray area, black and white. Or if you think it should be more of a, necessary and proper clause, go back to that point, go back to that amendment, how things change and how things are constantly evolving as a country, and that's how you progress. So there really are two fundamentally different viewpoints on how this country should work, and it's still present today. It's still present in our political elections, in our political situations, to where we can still have that debate and still be I'll say somewhat productive. Congress and the president have been bickering back and forth for the longest time now, and not much is being done. So it is that mindset. It's that same ideology. But check out this. Pause the video and just check out this chart and just kind of or take a snapshot, print some notes, whatever you want to do. But this is a huge point that should understand the breakdown of this new political system, this new political parties that are starting to pop up. Okay, Washington's farewell. All right, so we talked about a lot of the things that he faced, a lot of things that he was struggling with. Now, his farewell address is borderline genius. Okay, and ultimately one of the best political speeches that you could probably ever read. I encourage you guys to go out there and check out the actual context of his speech. You won't regret it. It's kind of interesting, and kind of think about what it's like today as compared to then, and the things that he warned about then, and what we're experiencing today. All right, so his argument against being involved in foreign affairs, to only worry about the United States, to not make permanent alliances. World War II, okay, World War I, permanent alliances, pretty much sums that up. Do not form political parties. Democrats hate Republicans, Republicans hate Democrats. There's this huge divide inside of our country today, where it's not even complaining about policies and complaining about what they're actually doing. It's more or less like poking at each other. It's ridiculous. It's insane allegations that both sides are guilty of. Don't fall into sectionalism. Okay, he was calling that out, and we eventually got to the Civil War. It was over sectionalism. It is insane how spot on his speech was. So just kind of something interesting to make sure we hit on before we close out of Washington and jump into Mr. John Adams. Fascinating person, fascinating character, very, very stern individual. Just go watch John Adams, read the book John Adams. It's one of the best historical novelizations that I've ever read. It actually depicts him very, very accurately as far as what he was like as a father, a husband, things like that. It's just really an interesting guy as far as what all he was doing and accomplishing in law and politics, all of it. Okay, going on. Okay, Adams versus Jefferson. Okay, one of the big political rivalries at this point. Okay, we have the huge people jumping into the whole presidential election of 1796. In fact, I'm going to point this out. I don't know if this is showing up, but if you look down here, okay, you can see all of these names. Okay, so Burr, Marshall, Pinckney, obviously Adams, Jefferson. But you look down here at the bottom, Washington made it pretty clear. I'm done. I don't want to be president anymore. But he still gets electoral votes. Kind of interesting how that worked out. And I would argue that he probably would have easily won election again, but he wanted to go retire. He wanted to do that right after the war, but his country wanted him. So that is what he did. So the political election, kind of the whole situation that brings about the 12th Amendment in 1804, where it's ratified. It's the ideology that if you run for president, the person who finishes first, you're the president. First person that finishes second, you are the vice president. If you look at how this turned out, and you remember, think back to this little chart, okay, leaders of both of these parties, Adams, Jefferson, okay, opposite. And if you look at the criteria, opposite, completely opposite. They are President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson. Very interesting dynamic that was established at this point in history. But at the same time, okay, you've got to learn to work with people. At this point, they had their huge differences, but they could still get things done. In fact, even though they were political rivals, they became very, very close friends. Okay? And actually, they died within a few hours of each other. It's almost like they were synced up of when they would check out, so to speak. But it's kind of an interesting dynamic, an interesting thing to kind of make sure you know. Going on with this. Gather a little bit of notes here. For the XYZ affair, this is basically the first major challenge to John Adams. French warships were seizing American ships, as we've been talking about, and things like that. Adams sent delegation to Paris to negotiate a peaceful settlement, but there were certain French prime ministers, certain French ministers that would be identified as X, Y, and Z, requested bribes as the cost of entering into negotiations. The American delegates refused to pay in any bribes or to give money to engage in those types of things. Then there were demands for war. Okay, like that is how it escalated. But Adams knew the American Army and Navy were not strong enough to do this at this point, so he makes the wise decision of kind of toning things down and sending in new ministers to France. So that really is kind of the XYZ affair, and it is a huge issue that he has to face, and that kind of escalates things as far as the mistrust and misguidance between the French and the Americans. A lot of "we hate the French" mindsets that start to develop after the XYZ affair. The Alien and Sedition Acts. Here is where Mr. John Adams starts to get a bad rep. Naturalization for the alien side of the Alien and Sedition Acts extends from 5 to 14 years. Okay, wanting to keep the French. That was kind of a main mindset, and keep the French and other foreigners outside the United States to where we can actually focus more on nation building and make a strong government, continue making it stronger. Next thing for the Alien Sedition Act, still going off the alien side of it, deportation of quote-unquote dangerous enemy aliens. This could be for something as simple as stealing an apple from a cart. They would actually deport you for that. A very much a strong arm mindset for immigration, and a very strong arm approach for handling those types of individuals. There really isn't a huge set categorization for who's an American citizen and who's not, who should be, who isn't yet. It's still something that's going to be ongoing. Now, this last portion, the Sedition Act, this is imprisonment and fines for seditious speech. Basically, you badmouth the government, you're going to prison. I am guilty of badmouthing government. I'm sure all of you are, or your parents or grandparents or whoever has said something bad about the president, or said something bad about Congress, or said something bad about anybody in politics. If you existed then, you would be thrown into jail. Congressman Lyons is an example of this. He was quoted saying he might not be the best president. Went to prison, went to jail. But while he was actually in jail, he was reelected to serve another term. So kind of understanding how that whole mindset works, it is very questionable, very, very concerning that John Adams would do this. Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, nullification. Can you pick and choose what rules and what laws to follow? For Virginia and Kentucky, they thought that, well, we don't really agree with these laws, so we're going to, kind of ignore them, kind of establishing what the rules are for following things. The Alien and Sedition Acts are what generated this response. So it's kind of like, okay, we're going to ignore those ideas and nullify those laws within our parameters, within our borders. So we're not going to report issues of sedition and things of that nature. If you agree with the law or not, is it still the law? If you agree with the law or not, do you still have to follow the law? Okay, I mean it's a huge question. I mean, obviously, you could. Some people are like, well, if you murder somebody, I mean, it's still different than that. I mean, it's still somewhat very different. Okay, very different in terms of what you're hitting on. Okay, this last slide. Election of 1800, the spirit of 1776 versus the spirit of 1787. Going on and talking about what you have going on as far as the election is concerned. If you look at the breakdown, this is between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. This was probably as negative of an election as you could possibly get. And the reason this is spirit of 1776, some people say, well, the spirit of 1776 is very backwards, very slow. And then some people say, hey, it's very revolutionary. And then the spirit of 1787 has the mindset of being, okay, future oriented. We're going to change things. We're going to move things on. Also, 1787 was a lot of political bickering, stuck in the now, not be able to see the future, things of that nature. Kind of something else to add on here is to look at Prosser's Rebellion, 1800. This was an unsuccessful slave revolt in Virginia. This will come back up, especially as we keep moving closer to the Civil War. But Prosser's Rebellion was basically crushed, but this was the start of the whole mindset and the whole discussion of the role of government. Okay, certain inalienable rights, all men are created equal, things like that. This is where things start to pop up of that nature. So something to kind of note and throw out there with that. But back to the campaign, the actual election. John Adams, okay, Jefferson attacked Adams saying, oh, he's pro-British, he's anti-Republican, he wanted to be a king, he's wanted to be this huge tyrant and stuff like that. And Adams was throwing dirt right back. He was throwing dirt at Jefferson saying, oh, he's this crazy, nasty atheist who doesn't believe in God and has no sense of honor. He wants to burn your churches and eat French fries and have babies with slaves. Okay, so like some crazy allegations thrown around by both individuals. What you see happening from this whole situation, it's all going to come down to essentially a runoff election. And it's really kind of interesting. We'll actually jump back here to this chart to let you see the breakdown here. Click up here. Okay, Adams, Hamilton, Federalists, Jefferson and Madison, Democratic Republicans. Okay, so if you look down through here, okay, you see some inconsistencies. Okay, you see some situations here. Hamilton is actually going to swing the votes. Hamilton is actually going to be responsible for making Jefferson the next president. So we'll jump back here. And the reason that does happen is because Jefferson wins the popular vote. And then you see the whole situation of Burr coming in second. All right, so you have the whole situation of not knowing where people stand. It was seen as Burr being inexperienced, not having enough power, not having enough of a say. He actually draws away votes from Adams. So we have a dead heat. Hamilton comes to the aid of Jefferson, which is shocking. And you actually have the death by duel. But overall, it is a huge runoff election. Okay, Adams actually sees the guide of the whole rich elite group voting and getting him in office, which is kind of interesting because he is that Democratic Republican anti-federalist individual. Okay, so this really kind of sets us up for going into the Jeffersonian era, which for you guys, and as far as your reading goes, I believe it's chapter 7, and some going into chapter 8 as well. So it's a huge topic, huge thing that we're going to start diving into. Hopefully you guys feel like this video helped you as far as understanding the history, understanding the story, and things like that. Once again, just from your quiz that you guys had on Friday, which is going to be counted as a homework score. Some of you were saying, thank God. I know I'm awesome. But we're going to do that for you guys. The next quiz will actually be quiz score, so just kind of understand that and those expectations. In-class lecture and discussions. It is not supplement for your reading. Okay, I've said this before. Your book is your Bible. You must read every single night, every single day. You need to get in a rhythm. If you are not reading, that is probably explaining some of your low scores. We're going to walk through. I'm probably going to create another video actually to kind of walk through the quiz and the results and kind of give some tips and things like that to help you guys understand where you went wrong, to show you guys some of the correct answers and stuff like that. Still going to play around with that. So you may watch a little bit later for those videos to go through the quiz, but just want to make sure you guys are reading. Okay, these discussions, the activities in class, these lecture videos, lectures in class, they are supplementing your reading. Okay, this is a college course. This is how a college course expectations run. Your professor may give you an assigned reading. You're expected to read that text. You're expected to read your book. Then you come to class and your professor is going to talk to you and basically give a lecture about whatever the heck he wants. Okay, I'm not going to be that crazy or that bad. But that's kind of the mindset, and that's really the kind of rhythm you guys have to get into. Okay, so just kind of understand that, making sure you guys are all familiar with it. Other than that, that's all I have for you guys. Hopefully this helps. We will talk to you guys later.